You'll have to forgive your old pal Jim Sterling today. I recently entered a competition to win an all-expenses-paid trip to having fucking bronchitis, and I won. So if I'm a wheezy, sweaty, crinkly-shirted mess, that'll be why. Not that I'm saying having bronchitis and regular asthma attacks is a bad thing. I don't want to make any statements here. I wouldn't want to be seen committing to the idea that bronchitis is bad. Some would assume that's an easy thing to take a stand against, but we don't want to make any statements here on the Jimquisition. Now let's talk about the Division 2, which isn't divisive at all. The Division 2, a game about civil war, societal collapse and terrorism, is, according to its creators, not making any political statements. It's a puzzling assertion to make for almost any game attempting to present a serious story about civil unrest, much less one that proudly plasters Tom Clancy all over its promotional material, Clancy having been an author of political thrillers and military espionage stories. The Division 2 team has been twisting and squirming as it attempts to capitalise on political imagery, while claiming to radiate no politics at all. And nowhere has the squirming been squirmier than in a by now notorious Polygon interview, in which creative director Terry Spear came off as downright pitiful in his attempts to avoid admitting the obvious. In the interview, Polygon's Charlie Hall does an impressively tenacious job of trying to nail Spear down, attempting to get him to admit pretty basic, obvious facts, which the director appears unable to do. When asked if the Division 2 is about fighting a corrupt government, Terry Spear wouldn't come close to admitting it, simply saying it was about rebuilding and helping the civilians move forward and move on, so there's tons of narrative bits in there. He wouldn't even admit the game was about civil war, instead sidestepping such charges to talk about their choice of Washington DC as a location. That had nothing to do with anything, but he just said it was about topping Manhattan in the first game. Okay, cool, that's why you chose Washington DC, but the Americans are fighting the Americans in a war. In a civil war. Any thoughts on that, Terry? Any thoughts at all about the premise of your game? Any thoughts at all? One of the most amazing parts of the interview is when the Polygon interviewer straight up relays the Division's premise to him, and Spear writes the premise off as speculation. In response to Hall saying the titular Division is the last remnant of an old government trying to push out the sitting government, he fired back with, "That's an amazing assumption that you're making, one that I'm not going to confirm or deny. I'm just going to say that you are a veteran agent who was activated before the time of the Division 2, and you got the SOS call. Okay, you're war-torn, you're tired, you've been doing Division stuff elsewhere, and you arrive in DC to find what it is that you're going to find. And you're going to rebuild and make sure that DC does not collapse, Shade does not collapse, and that the nation does not collapse. And so should it be clear, we're definitely not making any political statements, right? This is still a work of fiction, right?" Now, with all due respect to the Division 2's creative director, that is among the more pathetic loads of non-committal, evasive guff I've ever read. Eventually, Spear boils down all the political imagery and themes to its most shallow form, claiming that we are absolutely here to explore a new city, as if that's all the Division 2 is, a city exploration sim. You couldn't get more pitifully reductive and insulting towards your own game if you tried. Even if the Polygon interviewer was making wild assumptions, Terry Spear didn't have the guts to provide any clarity, refusing to confirm or deny basic facts about the game's own premise. And if you're that scared of your game's own ideas, you're probably in the wrong business, or at least making the wrong games. The Division 2 begins with a cutscene which talks about the collapse of American civilization and makes a clearly definitive point that the people who had guns were the ones who survived the fall. Almost immediately, the game is flirting with gun debates.
And with no police to protect you, did you own a gun?
Did your neighbor?
Some survived.
The very first mission involves you fighting your way to the White House, a place which serves as your seat of operation. You know, the big political place, the place with all the politics. It's the White House, where the politics live. If you go into the game knowing what Terry Spear said, it almost comes off as parody. It's so obviously fucking political. And in being political, it so obviously says things because it can't help but say things once you start using that imagery and start exploring those themes. I mean, the very backstory of The Division spins from a terrorist bioweapon attack that circulated via infected banknotes on Black Friday. American consumerism having been weaponized against itself. Now, if anyone from Ubisoft or Red Storm Entertainment can explain to me how that's not making any political statements, I'll explain to them how muscular, fit, and attractive I am. Many games, whether intentional or not, make political statements. And if you fail to commit to any, people will come up with them for you. There's a distinct subset of people who believe politics have no place in video games. An impossible belief due to how politics affects everything in life and directly informs the vast majority of fiction and of course non-fiction out there. From early nursery rhymes to best-selling novels, politics is quite literally everywhere. Many of the most beloved and critically acclaimed video games are soaked in political statements and themes. Metal Gear Solid and its sequels touch on everything from nuclear disarmament to war profiteering to information redaction. BioShock is about an extremist libertarian city descending into a chaos of its own making. There are the strong environmentalist themes in Final Fantasy VII. Call of Duty, despite its reputation as Hoorah USA propaganda, actually carries some strong anti-war messaging in a number of its campaigns. Politics can be extracted from even the most unassuming of games because directly or indirectly they inform many of the most unassuming games. For what are Sonic the Hedgehog titles if they're not about a freedom fighter taking down an industrial capitalist's enslavement ring? And what can we say about Mario's constant attempts to stop one monarch forcing another into an arranged marriage? These are points similar to ones many have made over the years, but they bear repeating, especially in response to a guy claiming his game isn't political because it is, in his words, still a work of fiction, right? I mean, just wow. Fucking wow! I gotta wonder what most political fiction writers think of that statement. Obviously there's a mild tongue-in-cheek element when we talk about the politics of Mario, but they are there. You can extract them. And yeah, you could say that it's a bit of a stretch to talk about arranged marriage in Mario, even though it is there. A game literally about governments and terrorisms and civil wars is going to say something no matter how fictional it is. Ubisoft CEO Yves Guillemot wasn't quite as evasive as the red light director, but still refused to admit The Division 2 was saying anything. "Our goal in all the games we create is to make people think," he told The Guardian. "We want to put them in front of questions that they don't always ask themselves automatically. We want players to listen to different opinions and to have their own opinions. Our goal is to give all the tools to the player in order for them to think about the subject, to be able to see things from far enough away." What Guillemot fails to note is that his stated goal is itself a political statement. It's saying that the questions presented in-game, the opinions on display, are worthy of consideration and debate. Guillemot says Ubisoft's games give us the tools to think about subjects, but Ubisoft's making the ultimate choice about which tools, which subjects are present in-game. And those choices say something in and of themselves. If the game asks us to consider the benefits of possessing firearms in times of unrest, which The Division 2 immediately does, how can that not be making a statement? It's telling us that's an important political topic, that the gun debate issue is an issue worth debating. That's a clear-cut political statement. Guillemot went on to tell The Guardian that The Division 2 is both politically themed and politically impartial, but those two statements simply do not work together. The choice to make politically themed material and the choice over what themes to use, what statements to broadcast, are not impartially chosen. Remember, this game has antagonists, it has protagonists, it has villainous characters, it has heroic characters. Where those characters are, what those characters believe, whether we're meant to sympathise with them or not. Those are all choices Ubisoft's made, and they all say something about the politics of the game. To recap, Ubisoft decided what to put in their game, what to represent, and what to have us think about. Those decisions are direct reflections of political beliefs. Claiming Tom Clancy's The Division 2, a game about civil war, corruption, terrorism, the role of government, makes no political statements is about as absurd as that time Bethesda claimed its paid mods, which were paid mods, were not paid mods. More than that, it does an utter disservice to video games themselves as a medium. To claim The Division is just about exploring a city or just asking questions is to narratively neuter it, to state that it's a spineless game with toothless themes, that it has neither the guts nor the capacity to stand for anything or say anything, which is downright insulting, not just to the audience's intelligence, but to The Division too. Lately, game companies appear terrified to be seen taking stands on anything. Deus Ex: Mankind Divided proudly marketed itself as a game about mechanical apartheid and explores themes of transhumanism, segregation, and martial law, yet Square Enix denied the game had anything to do with the imagery it was deliberately utilising. It was claimed Mankind Divided wasn't trying to take a side in a story about very obvious and clear oppression of marginalised groups. And if you're saying you're not taking a side in that, you are not looking enlightened and balanced. In fact, refusing to take a side in that discussion just makes you look like a dick, an upholder of a very shitty status quo, which is often how people look when they say they're not taking sides. Because to not take a side is to uphold the status quo, and that is, in itself, a political statement. Even David Cage, so proud about how deep and provocative he thinks his games are, tried to distance himself from political themes in Detroit Become Human, a game about clearly defined prejudice, political upheaval, and the fear of automation. It's a game firmly sympathetic to the androids who are mistreated and othered and regularly misblamed for society's ills, with clear parallels to real-world racism. I used to say, as a joke, that Detroit Become Human boiled down to, what if androids was people? Which was a crack at the game's lackluster writing. But in researching for this video, to my disbelief, I found David Cage pretty much said the exact same thing in the game's defense. The story I'm telling is really about androids, he limply told Kotaku. They are discovering emotions and wanting to be free. If people want to see parallels with this or that, that's fine with me, but my story's about androids who want to be free. Yep, forget the game's overt political themes, forget the potential to say something of value, just render the game down to the most simplistic what if androids was people story imaginable. A child story. The most vapid, oversimplified take on an android story. Way to respect your own work. Just recently, Valve hemmed and hawed over the removal of Rape Day from Steam, a game no highly prominent storefront in its right mind would be caught distributing. It spent days allowing the controversy to fester and even gain attention from real politicians before taking it down. Doing so with a mealy-mouthed statement only going so far as to say the game posed unknown costs and risks. It couldn't even bring itself to take a stand against Rape Day. That's a gimme. That's a freebie! That is one of the easiest things it could have taken a stand against, and no, Valve didn't dare. In a way, it's not hard to see why game companies could be scared to be seen having opinions. We live in some fucked up times where battle lines are being drawn in the sand over comic book movies, and where political radicalization is one of social media's biggest problems. We're dealing with real-life Nazis again. There's a very real terror out there about becoming targeted in the next big shitstorm, and I can appreciate that. This show, which I could also reductively boil down to just a show about video games, gets political all the time, especially when it comes to capitalism, regulation, and unchecked business practices, and it really can be exhausting and stress-inducing. But game companies, as they so often do, want to have their cake and fuck it too. They want to exploit political themes while claiming to be apolitical. They want to talk about prejudice, but lie, and say it's only fictional prejudice, as if that idea would have any real weight without the real-world prejudice informing the stories. Which is just insulting to the victims of real-world prejudice, as if their stories are good enough to exploit for money, for products, but not important enough to actually discuss in the products. They want to just ask questions without having the backbone to answer any of them, to commit to anything, or even admit that the choice of questions are themselves a kind of answer. They want to sell a game literally about a terrorist-born American civil war in which you operate from the White House as a governmental remnant fighting an oppressive regime with hints that your own side might have its issues, and they want to claim that says nothing, that it means nothing. They can keep that lie going if they want, but they're not fooling anyone. All they're doing is making their own game sound like meandering, ineffectual, weakly written monuments to insipidity. And you know what? I think video games deserve a bit more respect than that. Mind you, considering Far Cry 5 was too cowardly to even say that a violent, militant doomsday prepper cult was bad, maybe their games don't deserve any respect at all. Considering right now we have a president that struggles to even condemn white supremacy, another gimme, another freebie, it's hardly surprising that video game companies are terrified to be seen having a spine, a backbone, a belief, a stance, anything. But as I've said, those stances come out regardless. Your beliefs inform the things you write, the things you say, the things you do. And to pretend otherwise is a lie. And in the video game industry, it's exploitation. Political imagery is being exploited if it can't be backed up with anything of actual worth or substance. Or if at the very least, even more insultingly perhaps, the people making the game pretend that there's no weight to what's being said or shown, which is what they're trying to do with The Division 2. You can play it for 10 minutes and find that it says things. And you can do that with many video games. You can do that with many things you watch. The beliefs are there. The information is there. I could, again, just say the Jimquisition is a video game show. It's just about video games. But that's a lie. Just like it's a lie to say that The Division 2 is apolitical. It's not. Very few things are. And even if they try to be, that centrism is itself politicized. So thank God for me. I'd say more, but I'm not joking about the bronchitis. I think I'm actually dying. Right now. Right now. I could be dead before you see this.